Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hi. Hi.
Hi. Okay, what council members do we have here? I heard Mayor Pro Tem Irving.
I'm here.
Okay. And Liz Becerra. So, and then, okay, do we have Member Gomez?
No, she informed us she was not going to attend.
Okay.
Mayor
And-
Jones, we might want to give her a chance. I just seen her in the back of City Hall less than about 5-7 minutes ago. Maybe
Okay.
she's driving home to log on.
Okay, well, we are going to start promptly at 4 o'clock. So hopefully
Okay.
she'll be set up to go. It would certainly be ideal if she were able to attend.
Yeah, like I said, I just seen her right now about 5-7 minutes ago. It was like 20 to 4.
Okay, perfect.
Mhm.
Snacking. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, is everybody ready?
Yes.
Yes, all right.
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Well, good evening, everyone. Today is January 14, 2021. The time is 4 p.m. The special meeting of the following will come to order: the Victorville City Council, the Victorville Library Board of Trustees, the Southern California Logistics Rail Authority, Southern California Logistics Airport Authority, successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency, the city as housing asset successor, the Joint Powers Financing Authority, and the Victorville Water District. Madam Mayor, will you kindly call the roll?
Councilmember Becerra,
Here.
Councilmember Gomez, Councilmember Ramirez.
Did you hear me say here?
Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. Councilmember Ramirez, Mayor Pro Tem Irving,
Present.
Mayor Jones.
Here, so a quorum has been established. And before the chair moves on to the introduction of public comments, Madam Clerk, are there any requests to speak by the audience members?
I don't have any hands raised, but there is one item. I cannot find who Councilmember Gomez, which phone she is calling in on, so I could make her a co-host.
That's in an iPhone ending in 3190.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. So since this is going to be our only public comment period, at this time, the chair invites any members of the audience to raise their hand on the Zoom screen if they wish to speak. Madam Clerk, are there any?
No speakers.
Okay, then we're going to dispense with the intro.
I'm sorry, one just raised her hand. I believe
There-
it, yes, I believe it is Maggie Martin.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Martin, you are recognized. Please go ahead. Oh, you know what? Hold on. All right, so welcome to tonight's meeting of the Victorville City. No, Ms. Martin, hold on for just a moment. So welcome to tonight's meeting of the Victorville City Council. Your City Council is interested in your ideas and opinions and furthermore endeavors to incorporate them into its deliberations. At the same time, the council must be able to carry out its business in an orderly and organized manner that's efficient and free from material disruption. Therefore, this meeting will be administered in accordance with the council's established policies and procedures and Government Code Section 54957.9. Open meeting laws do not confer any privilege or protection for expression beyond that otherwise provided by law, nor do they permit council members to engage in dialogue during the public comment period. All testimony is to be directed solely to the council. Individual speakers are allowed to address the council once per agenda item for up to 3 minutes. When comments are invited, click the raise your hand feature located on the Zoom screen. Individuals will be unmuted, called on by name, then recognized by the presiding officer. Speakers are requested to comment as briefly as the subject permits. Individuals may speak to issues not posted on the agenda during the public comment section on the agenda, providing those issues are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. The presiding officer may decrease the time allowed for public presentation depending on the number of persons wishing to be heard. The presiding officer may also take a poll of speakers for or against a particular issue and may ask that additional persons speak only if they have something new to add. Audience members may not disrupt, disturb, or otherwise impede the orderly conduct of this meeting, and those who do are subject to removal from the meeting pursuant to Penal Codes 403. Your understanding and cooperation are appreciated. And that having been said, Ms. Martin, please go ahead.
Did you hear me?
I hear you now.
Okay. I said good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. Glad to see everybody there. Very briefly, as you requested, Madam Mayor, I'm very glad to see this on the special council meeting agenda. I believe the council is in need of it. And the only concern I have had in the past, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The only concern that I've had in the past, and I find it too informal and not necessarily professional. I've raised this issue months ago. I don't think it's appropriate for council members to refer to one another by their first name. I'm very uncomfortable with that. And it doesn't, from what I read of rules of order, it doesn't seem like the appropriate thing to do. That's all I have, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. All right, so with that said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the public comment period is closed, by the way.
Councilmember
And-
Gomez has a point of clarification.
Member is not recognized. So we're going to go ahead and move on to item 1. This is the agenda item, Rosenberg's Rules of Order, presentation on parliamentary procedures in conjunction with the City Council's Policy and Procedures Manual. As this item was originally brought forward by the chair, I'm going to go ahead and tee up this item.
Council member has a point of order.
Council member, state your point. At this point, you're expected to cite the breach in policy that's occurring.
If I were a legislator or someone that knew all the penal codes, I would. My point right now is you said a lot of stuff in the beginning that I don't have access to. So can you send me some information? Because you read a lot of new stuff for me that I've never heard before.
Sure, Councilmember Gomez, that's not a point of order, so it's not well taken, but to the extent that we can be of service to you after the meeting, we certainly will. All right, so moving on to item 1, I wish to thank my colleagues for allowing me to place this agenda item on tonight's meeting. This item was brought forward to provide us with specialized training and our parliamentary rules so that we may be fully equipped to carry out our business meetings in line with professional standards. Once through this course, I have every confidence and expectation that the knowledge we gain will make for more meaningful, efficient, and collegial meetings going forward. As one important member of our team is not available for this meeting this evening, the chair respectfully urges her to view this training before next Tuesday's meeting so that we may all be on the proverbial same page as to our role and responsibilities behind the dais. Should Member Ramirez have any questions that were not answered during the training, she is invited to straightaway contact City Attorney Dubort-Nautsky for assistance. With that said, Mr. Dubort-Nautsky, I'm going to go ahead and hand this item over to you, and thank you for presenting for us.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and council members. First, thank you for making a little time for today's meeting. We'll try and keep it as quick as possible and cover quite a few topics. First, I want to introduce a couple of my associates. Most of you know, but some of you may not. We have with us today Tara Taguchi. She basically covers all of the city's planning commission meetings and helps on numerous other items, all aspects of the city government. In addition, we have Kevin Spalding. Kevin basically does a lot of code enforcement work with the city, does a lot of your public records request responses, and also works on litigation matters. So they're here tonight. Hopefully they'll be involved in answering some of the questions when we get to a question and answer period at the end of the meeting. So the purpose for today's training session is really to try and start the year off on the right foot with respect to facilitating what are going to be hopefully efficient and user-friendly meetings. Given that we have 2 new council members, I think it was Mayor Jones's suggestion that we have a training session so that all of the council members can basically understand their roles going forward. The training is intended to simplify, clarify, and explain certain rules of parliamentary procedure. The key is that all of the rules should be clear, uniform, and have equal application. It should be able to enforce the rule of the majority, but at the same time, being able to respect the rights of the minority. So that's kind of the goals of parliamentary procedure rules. As most of you know, the city has adopted Rosenberg's Rules of Order, and we've modified some of those rules in connection with various amendments to our city's policy manual. In the agenda package, you have an outline. We'll kind of be following it briefly, but then also what we've provided is a quick reference guide. And that reference guide is helpful because I think it'll point out some of the distinctions, although they're very subtle, with Rosenberg's rules. First, a little bit of background. Why Rosenberg's? Well, the main competitor to Rosenberg's is Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's rules were drafted by an Army officer back in 1876, and they were basically meant to be used by large legislative bodies. They are in fact still used today by some of the larger legislative bodies, and in fact, they're even used by US Congress. However, they've been widely criticized as being way too complex, too cumbersome, and too lengthy for application to local bodies. As a result, most local bodies have opted to adopt Rosenberg's rules, either in their entirety or with slight modifications. Rosenberg's rules were actually authored by a California Superior Court judge, David Rosenberg. The rules are far simpler, they are based on common sense, and they are far easier to apply. Actually, most of Rosenberg's rules are all actually incorporated into Chapter 5 of the city's Policies and Procedures Manual. So if you were to focus on that, you'll pretty much find all of Rosenberg's rules there. A little more cumbersome to follow it that way, and hopefully the outline and the quick reference guide that we have attached will make your life a little easier. There have been a couple of slight deviations between Rosenberg's rules and what's in our policy manual, and we will address those a little bit later in the presentation. So the best way to understand Rosenberg's rules would be to hear from the man himself. Accordingly, what we want to do is share a tutorial. It takes about 45 minutes by Mr. Rosenberg that's been distributed by the League of California Cities, endorsed by the League of California Cities, and actually is used by most of the California cities. So unless there are any immediate questions, we're going to flip right into Mr. Rosenberg's presentation.
Yes, Councilmember Gomez has a point of inquiry.
Member Gomez, points of inquiry are, well, you know what, since this is a, hold on, since this is a work, points of inquiry are not a part of Rosenberg's Rules of Order, but for the purposes of moving us along in the workshop until we have the training that we need, certainly you can inquire of the city attorney.
Yes, so the attorney just asked for a question and you interrupted. You are making it very difficult for me to try to ask questions for the purposes of instruction. So
Councilmember Gomez,
I
move on,
ask you to please cease and desist from interrupting me, and I would greatly appreciate it. Now, going back to the question that he asked of us, if we had any questions, yes, I do, and that's why I call it a point of inquiry. So are you going to be emailing this information to our desks or to our emails?
You do actually have, as part of the agenda package, you have an outline of the proceedings as well as a quick reference guide. We're going to listen to the Rosenberg tutorial, and if you want, we can absolutely give you a link to it. So some of the council members may actually have heard it before. It's really good to listen to it again. It's very helpful also for city staff. And like I said, it's probably the best resource that we have since Mr. Rosenberg himself wrote the rules, and he puts it into a very succinct and easy to follow manner. At the end of the video, we certainly then will have a question and answer period because you may have some questions based on what he presents.
Okay, so you will be sending that to council.
We can send out a link to that, certainly.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And with that, Kevin, I'll ask you to queue up the Rosenbergs. Like I said, it's about 45 minutes, so bear with it. He goes through some examples and then I think puts it into a very easy and understandable manner. One thing that you'll notice when he talks about abstentions and absences, you will note he talks about two different ways of doing that. We at the city follow what he calls the default rule, which is basically the first version of the analysis. But again, we'll follow up with that after we've heard the video. So Kevin, if you're ready to go.
Yeah, just give me a minute.
And so council members, while this is queuing up, the video is going to play throughout. So please make sure to take notes during this so that if you have any questions afterward, you can feel free to ask them.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Rosenberg. Welcome to Parliamentary Procedure Simplified. I think you're going to enjoy this course, and I think you're going to get a lot out of the workshop. First of all, as I said, my name is David Rosenberg. I am a judge of the Superior Court in California, but in my former lives, I served on a city council here in California. In fact, I served for 12 years, 3 complete terms, including 2 terms as mayor of my city. I also served on a board of supervisors for 2 terms, including 2 terms as chairman of the board. Prior to that time, and during that time, I also served as chairman or president of a number of organizations, boards, and commissions, including the California State Lottery. So I've had lots of experience, decades of experience in chairing meetings and running meetings and with parliamentary procedure. Now, about 15 or 20 years ago, I started teaching this workshop called Rosenberg's Rules of Order. And it proved to be so popular that I kept being asked to teach it again and again and again. In fact, it's gotten so popular that I've had to create this CD so that it can be spread among the communities of California and outside of California, so that people can learn and appreciate not only how to run a meeting, but how to make a meeting very understandable, very user-friendly, not only to members of the body, but also to members of the public. Now, what are we going to learn today? First of all, as a result of this class, you will not feel overwhelmed by the complexities of parliamentary procedure. You will feel at home as an active participant at a city council meeting, at a board of supervisors meeting, or at any other meeting in which you are participating. And finally, if you are the mayor or the chairman or the presiding officer, you will feel comfortable with running that meeting. This course has been taken by dozens, if not hundreds, of mayors, city council members, members of boards of supervisors, city clerks, city attorneys, county council, and other normal folks. And I've uniformly received a lot of comments in response, and I've structured this course with those comments in mind. So I think you're going to find what you're going to hear today to be very useful to you as you run or participate in meetings. Now, let's talk about rules. What's the purpose of rules? Number one, rules should establish order. That makes sense. Number two, rules should be clear. Otherwise, if rules are not clear, ultimately we wind up with two classes of people: those who know the rules and can follow the process, and those who aren't aware of the rules or don't know the rules and are kind of left out of the process. Number three, rules should be user-friendly. In other words, they got to make sense. They've got to be uniform. You've got to apply the same rules to all people. And finally, and frankly very importantly, rules have to enforce the will of the majority while protecting the rights of the minority. We are a democracy, and when all is said and done, the majority rules, and ultimately the body has to make a decision. So these rules will help us in that process. Now, before we get going and get too far along in this workshop, I'd like to work with you to do a little self-test. Now, there's no pass or fail. We're not going to grade you. We're not going to score you. But I'm going to ask you 10 questions. And I want you to answer these questions as best you can. And after you've answered the questions in your own mind, I'll give you the correct answer, okay? So let's begin on the self-test. Question number one. You are a city council member at a meeting of your city council, and you can't hear the discussion due to noise being made by an ancient heating system. You should raise your hand and, when recognized, state, "Point of order, I can't hear what's being discussed." Now, is that true or false? What do you think? The answer? The answer is false. It's a bit of a trick question, but let me explain to you what I mean by that. This is not technically a point of order. It's a point of personal privilege. A point of order is when you raise a point regarding the parliamentary procedures. A point of personal privilege is an exercise of your right to be able to participate in a meeting, but you're being restricted in that right because of some problem. Noise, heat, cold, something of that nature. So you can raise a point of personal privileges at any time. And finally, you don't have to raise your hand and wait to be recognized. If you're stating a point of personal privilege, you have the right to be heard right now. In other words, you can't hear what's going on because of the fan or some other noise. And so you have the right to tell the chair of the meeting, point of personal privilege, I can't hear what's going on. Question number two. A vote on a hotly contested agenda item number 5 has been taken, and it passed by a vote of 3-2. You were one of the 2 votes against the item, but you just can't get the item out of your mind. Later in the meeting, you ask for reconsideration of item number 5 because you've thought of something which you believe will convince one of the majority votes to change his or her mind. The mayor rules you out of order and refuses to allow a vote on reconsideration. Now, is the mayor's ruling correct or incorrect? What do you think? Correct or incorrect? The answer? The mayor's ruling is correct. We'll get into this in our discussion of parliamentary procedure a little later in this workshop, but essentially, this is a vote for reconsideration. And reconsideration motions are a special bird. They're a special entity. You got to deal with them differently. Not everyone can ask for a vote of reconsideration. Only a member of the majority can ask for reconsideration. And frankly, that makes sense. If a member of the minority could ask for reconsideration on a vote, you'd never finish with it. Ad nauseum, you'd be dealing with reconsideration again and again and again. So only a member of the majority has the right to ask for a revote because they may have changed their mind. All right, let's go on to question number 3. It's 11 p.m. When the City Council reaches agenda item 25, the mayor asks for a show of hands of how many members of the public wish to speak on the item, and 32 people raise their hands. I'll bet you've been there before, ladies and gentlemen, right? The mayor announces that he will limit each speaker to 2 minutes each. Can the mayor properly do so? Yes or no? What do you think? Well, the answer is yes. The mayor may limit the presentations by members of the public. In fact, you'll find that the mayor or the chairman or the presiding officer has extensive powers in a parliamentary procedure setup, and the mayor properly may limit public speakers and the time that they speak on an item. Question number 4. Joe makes a motion to hold a city council retreat in May, and Mary seconds the motion. Sally then moves an amendment to have the retreat in June, and Fred seconds that motion. Esteban then moves a substitute motion to have no retreat this year, and Fred seconds the motion. The mayor announces that discussion will first begin on the motion to amend. Is this correct? Is this a correct ruling? The answer is either yes or no. Who thinks yes? Who thinks no? The answer is no. The mayor's ruling is wrong. When you have multiple motions on the floor, the rule of thumb is you always deal with the last motion first. And by the way, as a personal rule of thumb, I never allow more than 3 motions on the floor at one time. It just gets too darn confusing if you have 4, 5, or 6 motions on the floor, so limit it to 3 and go on from there. But the rule is you deal with the last motion first. In this case, you would be dealing with the substitute motion because that was the last motion on the floor. Question number 5. On a hotly contested agenda item attended by many members of the public, the audience becomes very engaged in the discussion, and members of the audience applaud in support or hiss in opposition following the remarks of the first speaker who addresses the City Council. The mayor states that no vocal expressions of support or opposition will be tolerated at the meeting and asks the public not to applaud or hiss after speakers conclude their remarks. May the mayor do so? Yes or no? The answer? The answer is yes. The mayor may do so. The mayor may control that sort of thing at meetings. Now, it gets more complicated. People applauding or hissing, I think we all generally agree that mayors may control that and say, you can't do that, none of that. No applause, no hissing, no booing. But what if members of the public bring signs with them? Little signs, 8.5 by 11 signs that say, support Measure X. What if they bring big signs, banners? Those are all questions we'll get into later in this workshop, but they raise interesting questions of decorum on the one hand, free speech on the other. Question number 6. A member of the City Council continually interrupts other members of the council while they're speaking on agenda items. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you may have been there on occasion, right? The mayor refuses to stop the interrupting council member from interrupting. You, as a member of the City Council, have the right to make a motion to challenge the ruling of the mayor and to have that motion voted on by the council. True or false? What do you think? The answer is true. This happens rarely, but this is a right that you have. The mayor has the next to the final say on everything. dealing with parliamentary procedure. The mayor, however, or the presiding officer, can be trumped by a vote of the body. You, as a member of the body, can challenge a ruling of the mayor by way of motion, and you have the right to have that motion heard, debated, and decided by the body. If the motion passes, the ruling of the mayor is overruled. Good to know. Question number 7. After a very long discussion and debate on a motion you made and duly seconded to approve the street repair schedule, you want to get on with the vote on the item, and so you say, "I call the question." The mayor then says, "Okay, let's proceed with the vote on the pending motion to approve the proposed street repair schedule." Did the mayor handle your call for the question properly? Yes or no? Who thinks yes? Who among you thinks no? So the rest of you have no opinion, right? Well, in any event, the answer is yes. The mayor handled it properly. Technically, ladies and gentlemen, it's a motion to cut off debate. When you say I call the question or I move the previous question, technically it is a motion to cut off debate, and it requires a 2/3 vote. However, the mayor in this case treated it informally, and I recommend that that is the better way to treat it. The mayor treated it as a request to vote based on the belief that there's no further discussion. So the mayor in this case looked to the left, looked to the right, kind of assessed that there was no further discussion to be had, and said, okay, let's proceed to the vote. Now, if the mayor, in assessing the situation, felt that people still wanted to discuss the matter, or if a member of the body said, no, I want to say a few things, then under those circumstances, the mayor should have treated it as a motion of the previous question. That is essentially a motion to cut off debate, and again, we'll discuss that later in this workshop. Question number 8. If the maker of a pending motion accepts a proposed change and incorporates the change into his or her motion, and the person who seconded the motion also accepts the change, this is called a friendly amendment. True or false? The answer? True. It is in fact a friendly amendment, and it's a way to move things along without getting bogged down in a lot of motions and amendments. Just accept it as a friendly amendment to the motion. If the seconder accepts it, then the motion is in fact amended, and you go on from there. Question number 9. Sam moves and receives a second on a motion to create a 7-member police oversight commission. Mariko moves and receives a second on a motion to make the police oversight commission 15 members. Helen moves and receives a second on a motion to create an ombudsman in lieu of a police oversight commission. The mayor schedules discussion and a vote on the 3rd motion, that is Helen's motion, which passes. The mayor then should schedule discussion and a vote on the 2nd motion, Mariko's motion. Is that true or is that false? What do you think? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, to question number 9 is false. This was, in fact, a substitute motion. And when the substitute motion passed, it made the other motions, the original motion and the motion to amend, moot. That's why substitute motions and motions to amend are so different. And we'll discuss this in more depth as we get into the workshop. As you can see, I'm just piquing your interest here. Finally, question number 10. In the middle of the meeting, Xenophobia, a member of the City Council, is recognized by the mayor and moves to adjourn the meeting. Her motion is seconded by Frank. The mayor calls for discussion prior to the vote. Xenophobia raises a point of order and says that the motion should be voted on immediately. Who is correct? Is the mayor correct, or is Xenophobia correct? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is Xenophobia. Xenophobia is correct. This was a motion to adjourn the meeting. And believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, motions to adjourn are not debatable. Once they're made and seconded, there is no discussion. They must be voted on immediately. I'm sure you all do this at your meetings on a consistent basis, but that's the rule. And later in this workshop, we will discuss what motions are debatable, what motions are not. We'll also discuss what motions require a 2/3 vote and what motions require a simple majority. And so that's a tiptoe through the tulips, ladies and gentlemen, of some of the items we'll be discussing in this workshop. Now, let's turn back to the PowerPoint presentation and talk about the role of the chair. I want to emphasize, ladies and gentlemen, the role of the chair is critically important to the process. It's critically important to a democracy. And so the chair's role is critically important in this presentation. What is the role of the chair? Number one, the chair must understand the rules. Frankly, the chair should understand the rules better than any member of the body. Number two, the chair moves the meeting and the agenda. This is a really important rule. The chair has to move it along. We've all been at meetings where a chair sort of sits back and doesn't move the agenda along. And if that happens, the meeting drives everyone crazy. On the other hand, a chair who moves things too quickly is almost as bad. You need to find the proper pace for everyone's comfort level. Number three, the chair, in my opinion, should take the lead role in process. Not to say the chair isn't an important member of the body and plays a very important role substantively. The chair's vote is just as good as any other member's vote. However, in terms of the process, making sure the process is followed, making sure the rules are followed, making sure people, members of the body and members of the public are treated fairly, it's the chair that we depend on. And finally, and this is hard for many chairs, but this is important, the chair should take a less active role in the debate. I recommend that the chair sit back, allow the other members to debate and discuss the issue, and then participate last. Have the final word, if you will. Now, don't underestimate the value, importance, and power of having the last word, the final word, in a debate. In fact, I think you will find very often that matters are contested and are often split 2-2 or 3-3, however many members there are of the body. And then the chair, the mayor, the president has a critically important role because that person then is the decider. That person makes the final decision and moves the item forward. Let's talk about the basic format for agenda items. I have created a little matrix, which you'll see in the PowerPoint, which shows a 10-step process in dealing with each agenda item. And ladies and gentlemen, if you follow this 10-step process, I think you'll find the process is fair and understandable, and the item moves forward. So, step number one, announce the agenda item. This is the role of the chair, and it's important. You need to announce at the get-go where you are. In other words, as the chair, tell the members of the body, tell whoever is taking the minutes, tell the members of the public. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now turn to agenda item 21, street tree replacement, or whatever the item is. Let everyone know where we are. So it's so important for the chairman, the mayor, whoever's presiding over the meeting, to announce to the public, to the body, to everyone where we are. Number two, report on the item. This is when we ask for staff or the chairman of the committee, member of the body, whoever is in charge, to give a report, a staff report, if you will, or a committee report. Number three, technical questions for clarification. This is when the presiding officer asks members of the body, ladies and gentlemen, do you have any technical questions of clarification? This is not a substantive debate. This is not a substantive discussion. This is clarification. This is where you need to get an item from the staff report clarified. Number four, public comments. I always like to put public comments as far in the front of the item as we can, and so we place it at number 4. This is when the presiding officer opens it up to members of the public to express themselves, to tell the body what they think. The presiding officer is entitled to limit the time depending on how many people want to speak on the item. I always ask for a show of hands. Could I see a show of hands of those who wish to speak on item number 21? If 3 people raise their hands, I give them more time. If 20 people raise their hands, I limit the time. In fact, sometimes when a lot of people raise their hands, I create tiers of time. For example, I will give people 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes. And I allow the 1 minute speakers to go first. So they line up and they speak for 1 minute. Sometimes they speak for 15 seconds. They just want to say, you know, I agree with what Joe said. So you can create more time for yourself by creating tiers of time: 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute. After the public comments, you close the public hearing. And as a matter of practice, I don't allow the members of the public to speak after that. Otherwise, the meetings go on just too long. I give the public their opportunity, and then the body has to have its opportunity. Number 5, I invite a motion. This can be done in many ways. I can ask the body, may I have a motion? Another way is to simply say, how about a motion to appoint a 15-member committee? In other words, you can suggest a motion. And when all else fails, you as the mayor or a presiding officer can make a motion if you feel so compelled. But I find it's best to have a motion on the floor when you're debating and discussing, so you know what you're debating and you know what you're discussing and you're much more focused. There are occasions where the body is very confused, and so sometimes you want to have the discussion before the motion. But 95 times out of 100, ladies and gentlemen, it's best to have a motion on the floor. After the motion, number 6, you want to have a second to the motion. In other words, you don't want something on the floor that only one person supports. You want to have at least 2 members of the body that have an inkling of support for that item. So you want a second. Number 7, you want to understand the motion. Now, what do I mean by that? It's important for the mayor to make sure everyone understands what is being discussed and debated. So you want to restate the motion. This can be done in several ways. 1, the presiding officer, the mayor, whoever, states the motion. Or number 2, the presiding officer can ask the maker of the motion to state the motion. Or number 3, you can ask the secretary or whoever's recording to state the motion. However, you do need to state the motion at a minimum before the vote, but hopefully before the discussion. Number 8, you want to discuss and debate. I have a rule of thumb that I limit people's time. This is either done by the rules of the body. Sometimes bodies have rules saying no more than 10 minutes or no more than 5 minutes. But you follow those rules, and if you don't have rules, you limit the time. Certainly limit the opportunities people have to discuss an item. In other words, don't let anyone speak to the item more than twice. And frankly, I follow a rule of thumb that I don't let a member of the body speak the second time until every member of the body has at least had an opportunity to speak the first time. Even if they don't exercise it, you give them the opportunity. Otherwise, you have members dominating the debate. And you don't want to do that. You want to give everyone an opportunity to discuss and debate the item. So after discussion and debate, you, number 9, take the vote. This can be done in many different ways. Normally it's done by a voice vote, but that's up to the chair. After the vote, number 10, very important, announce the vote. You would be amazed, ladies and gentlemen, how often that does not happen, but it's critically important that it does happen, because the members of the body, the members of the public, and most importantly, the recording secretary need to know what you just did. Tell them what you did, tell them the vote. In other words, for example, you might say, the recommendations of the Street Tree Commission have been adopted by the body. The vote was 3-2. With Council Members Smith and Jones dissenting. It's important to identify who dissented so that the vote is clear. Okay? So that is the basic format for agenda items. Now let's take a look at how we count votes. This, ladies and gentlemen, can be trickier than you think, and it gets tricky when we start dealing with abstentions. How you treat abstentions really depends on the rules of the body. Do you count those abstentions as votes of those present or votes of those present and voting? But let me give you some hypotheticals. Let's turn first to hypothetical number 1 on the PowerPoint. Assume you're a member of a 5-member city council. The vote required on a motion is a simple majority. We're not dealing with a 2/3 vote. We're dealing with simple majorities. Does the motion pass or fail on the following votes? Let's first turn to a vote of 3 yes and 2 no. That's simple. If the vote is 3 yes and 2 no, it passes, right? That's clear. How about if the vote is 3 yes, 1 no, and 1 abstention? Well, again, that passes. That's pretty clear. You've got 3 yeses. That is a majority under anyone's imagination and under anyone's stretch. Now, let's look at a vote of 2 yes, 2 no, and 1 abstain. Does that pass, or does that motion fail? The answer is that motion fails, because that's a tie vote. A tie vote cannot pass a motion. Tie vote always means the motion fails. Now let's take a look at a vote of 2 yes, 1 no vote, and 2 abstain. 2 yes, 1 no, and 2 abstain. Does that pass? Does that motion pass, or does that motion fail? Well, first of all, we do have a quorum. Everyone's there. You have 2 yeses, 1 no, and 2 abstentions. So that's clearly a quorum. You look to the rules of the body, by the way, to determine what a quorum is. Normally the rules of the body will say that a majority is a quorum. So for a 5-member body, 3 members are a quorum. If you have 3 members, you can do business. But does it have sufficient votes to pass? The answer is yes. The motion passes on a vote of 2 yes, 1 no, and 2 abstain. Why is that? Because the abstain votes count for purposes of a quorum. When you're counting, do you have a quorum? However, for purposes of the vote, it's like they never voted. You don't count them for the vote. And so, if you consider that they never voted, the vote is 2 yes and 1 no. It passes. Now, let's take a look at a vote of 2 yes, 1 no, and 2 absent. Does that pass, or does that fail? The answer is it passes. You still have a quorum. You have 3 members who are actually present. That's a quorum. And it's the same as the previous vote. 2 yeses and 1 no. That's a pass. A majority has voted in favor of the item. Now let's take a look at a vote of 1 yes, 0 no, 3 abstain, and 1 absent. Does that motion pass or fail? Again, let's look at a quorum. Do we have a quorum? Yes, we do. We actually have 4 of the members out of the 5 who are there. 3 of them voted abstain, but they're there. So the quorum is present. Do we have enough to pass? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. It passes because the vote is 1 yes, 0 no. It does pass. I actually had a situation like that occur on a city council I served on many years ago. One of the members of the body made a motion to put someone on a planning commission. We had a kind of rule of thumb that we went along with individual member motions on planning commissioners. And so we didn't like that person. We all kind of held our noses, but we didn't want to vote no, so we just abstained. The vote was 1 yes, in this case, 4 abstentions, and the person got seated on the planning commission. And just a wonderful member he was. Finally, we have a vote of 2 yes, 0 no, and 3 absent. Is that a pass or a fail? That, ladies and gentlemen, is a fail because why? Correct. No quorum. There is not a quorum present. Only 2 members of the 5-member body are present. You don't have a quorum, you can't act. So that is the rule when you're dealing with abstentions. Now let's take a look at hypothetical number 2. Assume you have a 5-member city council and you vote on a motion requiring a 2/3 vote to pass. In this case, it's a 2/3 vote to pass, not a simple majority. Which of the following votes passes or fails? And here you have 5 different scenarios. Let's take a look at those scenarios. Here are the answers to hypothetical number 2. First of all, 3 yes and 2 no. Does that pass or does that fail? That, ladies and gentlemen, fails. While it would pass if you needed a simple majority, it fails with a 2/3 vote. You need 2 no votes. If you have 2 no votes, you need 4 yes votes to pass a motion. Just a rule of thumb to figure it out, every no vote requires 2 yes votes to overcome. And so in this case, when you have 2 no votes, you needed 4 yes votes. You only got 3 yes votes, it fails. The next scenario, 4 yes, 1 no. Does that pass? Yes, it does. We have a 2/3 majority. There was only 1 no vote, so all you need is 2 yes votes to get a 2/3 majority. In this case, you had 4 yes votes. Clearly a 2/3 majority. How about 3 yes, 1 no, and 1 abstain? Number 1, you do have a quorum. And number 2, you do have enough to pass that motion. So it does pass. Remember, the abstain votes, you count them for purposes of quorum, but as far as the vote itself, it's like they never voted. The 4th scenario, you have 2 yes, 1 no, and 2 abstain. Does that pass or fail? Answer, it passes. 2 yes votes, 1 no vote, that is clearly a 2/3 majority. The 2 abstains count for quorum, but don't count for purposes of the vote. And finally, 2 yes, 1 no, 1 abstain, 1 absent. Does that pass? Answer, yes. Number 1, again, you have a quorum. There's only 1 person absent. 4 people are there. The quorum rule is a majority, normally. And you have 2 yes votes versus 1 no vote. That is a 2/3 majority. The abstain vote doesn't count. Let me give you hypothetical number 3. Let's assume the same factors as hypothetical number 2, except the vote required by the charter or the rules of the body is 2/3 of the members present at the meeting. Now, here are the scenarios. There are 5 of them. You can see them in the PowerPoint. Let's go to the answers to hypothetical number 3. You will find that the situation is a little different when the rules of the body say you count members present at the meeting, because this is an exception to the rule on counting abstentions. If your local rules say that you count votes of those present, then in that case you do count abstain votes. In that case, an abstention vote acts just like a no vote. So, looking at the 5 scenarios. First scenario, 3 yes and 2 no, it fails. You don't have a 2/3 majority, so that motion fails. How about 4 yes and 1 no vote? It passes. You have a 2/3 vote. How about 3 yes, 1 no, and 1 abstain? In that case, it fails, because in this case, the abstention counts as if it were a no vote, and you need 2/3 of those present. In this case, you have 1 no and 1 abstain, effectively 2 no votes, so you do not have a 2/3 majority. How about the next scenario? 2 yes, 1 no, and 2 abstain. Again, it fails. You still do not have a 2/3 vote. In fact, you have the equivalent of 3 no votes with the 2 abstentions and the 1 no vote. Finally, you have the 2 yes, 1 no, 1 abstain, and 1 absent. There are 4 people present, so we need 3 yes votes, and we just don't have it in this scenario, and so it fails. So let me show you a PowerPoint slide which tells you how you count abstain votes. Here's the rule of thumb. The general and the default rule, and the rule we apply in almost every case, is that you count all votes that are present and voting, so that you do not count abstain votes. Members who abstain are counted for purposes of determining a quorum, but it's like the abstain votes on the motion don't exist. On the other hand, If the rules of the body specifically say that you count votes of those present, then you do count abstained votes, and in that case, an abstained vote acts just like a no vote. All right, enough about abstentions, enough about voting. Let's move on to motions. In this slide, we see that we have three kinds of motions. Number one, we have the basic motion. Number two, we have the motion to amend. And number three, we have the substitute motion. Let me give you an example. I move that we set up a finance committee of 7 members to audit the city manager's office. That's the basic motion. Now let's assume someone makes the following motion. I move that we may amend that to have a finance committee of 10 members to audit the city manager's office. That's a motion to amend, because what that does is it changes the basic motion. Now let's assume someone makes the following motion. I move that we hire a CPA and that we not conduct an audit this year. That is a substitute motion, because that changes things completely. Now, these motions are treated differently. A motion to amend amends the basic motion. A substitute motion replaces the basic motion. So let me give you an example. There's a motion to have a 7-member audit committee. Someone else moves and duly seconded a motion to make it a 10-member committee. And then someone else makes a motion that we hire a CPA and not do an audit. You vote on the last motion that is on the floor, in this case the substitute motion. If that motion were to pass, the other motions are moot. The basic motion in this case, the motion to amend, they're moot. They're off the table, they're done. And you just implement the substitute motion. If the substitute motion were to fail, you go to the next motion on the floor, which is the motion to amend. If that were to fail, then you go to the basic motion. If that were to pass, you still go to the basic motion now as amended. And if the basic motion passes, that's what you implement. That's the scenario. Now let's talk about the issue of debating or not debating. The basic rule of debate and discussion is that all motions are subject to debate or discussion. That's the rule. Like everything else in parliamentary procedure, there are exceptions. These exceptions are a motion to adjourn. A motion to adjourn can be made, ladies and gentlemen, at any time in the meeting. Any time. However, you may not interrupt a speaker, and if a motion to adjourn is voted down, it may not be made again until an item of business has been handled and resolved. Otherwise, you'd be making motions to adjourn again and again and again. That is, an obstreperous member would do so. Now, a motion to take a recess, that is not debatable. You vote on it right away, and if people vote to do it, then you take a recess, just like you would adjourn. If it's voted on and passes, you adjourn. A motion to fix the time to adjourn, that's not debatable. You just vote on it. This, by the way, is a very useful motion. For example, it's 8:30 p.m. at night. Mr. Jones makes a motion that we adjourn by 11 p.m. It's seconded, not debatable. You vote on it. If it passes, the body must adjourn at 11 p.m. So you got 2.5 more hours to do your business. A motion to table, ladies and gentlemen, is not debatable. It also requires a simple majority. This is a very, very powerful motion. Very powerful. A motion to table is not debatable. You vote on it right away, and it requires just a simple majority to pass. You can do motions to table in 2 ways. You can just table, or you can table an item to a specific date and time. If an item is tabled to a specific date and time, or a specific date, it must be taken off the table and put back on the table of the body on that date or on that date and time. If you make a motion to table without specifying the date and time it comes back, that motion is on or under the table and never comes back to the body until someone moves to take it off the table. Again, a very powerful motion. And finally, a motion to limit debate. These are usually called motion for previous question, or it may even be a motion to limit debate. For example, moving to cut off debate after 30 more minutes, or moving to allow each member of the body only 7 minutes to discuss the item. Those motions are not debatable. Now, let's talk about supermajority votes. Again, there's a basic rule. All motions require a simple majority to pass. That makes sense. We are a democracy. Simple majority passes all motions. Again, there are exceptions, and here are the exceptions. The motion to limit debate. In other words, when you want to cut people off, either in terms of time or just cut debate off entirely, it requires a supermajority vote, a 2/3 vote. Now, a simple majority of a 5-member body is 3, but a 2/3 vote of a 5-member body is 4. So to cut off debate or to limit debate, you need 4 people if all 5 are present. And the rule there makes some sense, because you don't want to debate items forever. But if there's only one person that wants to keep talking about it, that person's going to get overruled. If 2 people want to keep talking about it, you're going to keep talking about it. A motion to close nominations requires a 2/3 vote. A motion to object to consideration of a question requires a 2/3 vote. In other words, you don't even consider the item from the get-go. Just cut it off. And a motion to suspend the rules requires a 2/3 vote. All these are supermajority votes, and when you think it through, they do make sense. Now, let's talk for a moment about a special motion. That is the motion to reconsider. This is a special motion, and it has special rules. Motions to reconsider require only a simple majority to pass, just like any other normal motion. However, it can only be made at certain times, and it can only be made by certain members. Who can make the motion to reconsider? Only a member of the majority. If a motion passes by a 3-2 vote, only a member of the 3-vote majority can ask to reconsider. Now, anyone can second that motion. However, only a member of the majority may ask for reconsideration. And as I told you earlier, it makes sense. Otherwise, a member of the minority could keep putting the item back on the table again and again and again, and you got to finally come to a decision and move on. It can only be made at certain times. In my experience on city councils and board of supervisors, I highly recommend that motions to reconsider only be made at the same meeting. At the same meeting. So later in the meeting, a member can make a motion to reconsider. It becomes more problematic if it's made at subsequent meetings. If it's made at the next meeting of the body, you got to make sure that all the proper rules of notice have been followed. And I'd never allow a motion to reconsider beyond the very next meeting. But rule of thumb, the best time to make a motion to reconsider is at the meeting where the item was first considered. Now, let's talk a moment about courtesy and decorum. Let's not lose sight of the fact that we are public entities and public bodies, and we are there for the public and with the public. And so the public doesn't want to see members of the body sniping at each other, or interrupting each other, or being rude to each other, or in other ways just being impossible. So it's important that we create the right atmosphere. And that means no personal attacks on people or motives. Don't interrupt each other. If you want to attack a person's ideas, fine. Disagree on the substance. Disagree on the concept. Have debate on the proposal. But don't attack the messenger. Don't attack the person. Don't be rude to the person. Certainly don't interrupt the person. Treat each other with courtesy, respect, and decorum. It's also important that we proceed one person at a time. possibly the most important rule of all is one speaker at a time. And so it's important that you be recognized. Find a way to be recognized by the chair or the mayor or the president. Agree amongst each other how you will do that, whether it's by saying Mr. Mayor or Madam Mayor, or by raising your hand, or in some other way being recognized. Once you're recognized, then you speak until someone else is recognized. Raise points of privilege or points of order when you need to do so. Remember the appeals process. If you disagree with the chair, you can appeal the ruling of the chair. The rule of thumb is the chair has the final word on a parliamentary procedure, protocol, process. However, the chair can be overruled if the body overrules him or her. Let's talk a moment about withdrawing a motion. A maker of a motion can withdraw that motion at any time, except after discussion and debate and after the restatement of the motion just before the vote. At that point, the motion no longer belongs to the maker, it belongs to the body. It can no longer be withdrawn. At that point, it has to be voted on, yea or nay. But up to that point, even during the debate, the maker of the motion has the right to withdraw it. However, another member of the body, perhaps the seconder of the motion, may wish to make the motion, and if it is seconded, then it is back on the floor for discussion and debate. Finally, let's talk about public input. I have 3 rules of thumb for public input. Rule number 1, tell the public what the body will be doing. So important. Keep the body, keep the public informed. Let them know what you will be doing. Ladies and gentlemen, this is item number 42 on the agenda, street repairs. What we're going to do first is hear from staff. They're going to give us a report. We'll ask for technical questions of clarification from the council. We will then open it up to you for public discussion and debate. Then we'll close it, have discussion on the body, and we'll take a vote. In other words, let the public know what's going to happen. Rule number 2, keep the public informed while the body is doing it. It's real simple. The chair or the mayor or the president simply says, all right, we've now had a staff report. Are there any questions of clarification? Hearing none, we're now going to move to public comments. I'm going to limit the members of the public to 3 minutes each. In other words, let the public know what you're doing, where you are in the agenda. And finally, rule number 3, when the body has acted, tell the public what the body did. You and I both know we've been at meetings where the body has acted and people are walking out of the meeting saying, what just happened? What did they do? Would someone tell me what they did? Well, it should never be that way. Make sure, if you're the chair, the president, the mayor, you tell not only the body, but the public, but also the secretary, who's keeping the minutes, exactly what it is you just did. Ladies and gentlemen, we passed the city budget of $2,500,000. Thank you very much. See you next year. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the presentation of Rosenberg's Rules of Order. By the way, you can find Rosenberg's Rules of Order if you will go to the internet. You can type in www.google.com, type in Rosenberg's Rules of Order, and you'll see it on the internet. Also, it's on my website, www.daverosenberg.net. Rosenberg's Rules of Orders are there. You can also get it through the League of California Cities. They allow you to purchase it, but as I say, you can get it free of charge by downloading it from the internet. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. And finally, we have one last slide. It took a lot of time to prepare this last PowerPoint slide, and so wait for that presentation and enjoy it while it lasts. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
All right, Mayor, hopefully that was informative for the council members. Like I indicated previously, our policy manual pretty closely follows what Mr. Rosenberg went through. I think some of the key takeaways are that the mayor is the presiding officer and really has significant control over how the meeting is to be run and to deal with issues such as points of order, points of privilege. And I think what we are hoping for is kind of a more formal process going forward where the council members are actually talking directly to and asking the presiding officer, the mayor in this case, with respect to their ability to participate in the meetings. A couple of distinctions that Mr. Rosenberg's rules have with our rules. One is we're slightly different in our policy manual with respect to the nomination process. We have a pretty clearly defined nomination process set forth in Chapter 2 with respect to the annual nominations of mayor and mayor pro tem. 2, we allow our presiding officer to actually adjourn and or recess meetings without requiring a vote and a motion. That's just a sort of a practical way of facilitating the closure of the meetings. We also allow for interruptions with respect to the call on the question. We basically allow sort of a modification here. The intent is to, if there's a call for the question, to have the speaker wrap up with hopefully a short, concise statement, and then immediately bring that to a vote of the body, which vote itself is non-debatable. And lastly, as we went through that presentation, again, I want to confirm that we follow basically what Mr. Rosenberg said with respect to the first 2 hypotheticals. We are what is called a default situation with respect to counting votes, meaning that we count the abstentions for the purposes of quorum, but we do not count their votes as no votes. We basically treat them as if they are not voting at all. And so with that, Mayor, I will turn it over to you. I believe council members yourself may have questions. I'll be glad to try and answer those.
Yes, so as the chair opens us up for questions by council members, I certainly don't want to limit this to the 3-minute rule that we normally do, especially since there's no decisions going to be made here this evening. I would ask council members to be judicious in the time that they spend asking questions and the number of questions. But of course, the goal is to make sure that we're all prepared going forward in our meetings with a good grasp of parliamentary rules. So with that said, I'll open it up to questions and we'll begin with Councilmember Gomez.
I'm going to ask you to give me a few minutes. I'm wrapping up the question that is for the attorney here.
I'm happy to do that this time. So then we'll go ahead and move on to Member Becerra.
Yes, I have a question for the city attorney. Mr. Dobranowski, what could be done in regards to another council member belittling, berating, talking rather crudely to other council members?
Well, again, as Mr. Rosenberg pointed out, the hope is that we have a level of decorum and that type of activity should not be tolerated. If it persists and the individual continues to berate other members, then it would be up to the presiding officer to basically warn that person. And if they continue at that point, I believe the mayor would have it within her power to basically ask that person to stop speaking and or mute that person.
In the same meeting or in a different meeting?
No, it'd be in the same meeting. If the person is not willing to sort of exercise decorum at that point, it would be appropriate after the person's been given warnings to basically either mute or cut that person's ability to speak off. The other rule that sort of is a Brown Act rule is if the person continues to essentially disrupt the meeting to a level where the city's business cannot be conducted, the person can actually be asked to be removed from the meeting. So the rule there is basically if you cannot conduct the city's business and the person is continuing to interrupt, in the past what we've typically done is taken a recess. If the person continues to interrupt, then that person could be asked to leave the meeting.
Okay, thank you, that's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Gomez, are you prepared at this time?
Yes, so I have several questions that I took upon myself to ask. So my first question is, well, first I'd like to start off with the formal takeaway that I took from this meeting is that the mayor needs to take the back seat in the debates. And when it comes to decorum and professionalism, minorities do have a voice, even though the majority does indeed take precedence in that regard. So my question is, I witnessed that with the committees and the assignments, the chair did take priority rather than the less active role in the debates. So I want to know if going forward, will the chair continue to take the lead in the debates, or will the chair be following the less active role in the debate as seen in Rosenberg's video?
Well, I think under those circumstances, the mayor at that point was sort of leading the discussion because she was going through the different nomination processes. Mr. Rosenberg just suggested that it's not mandatory that the mayor take a back seat. In fact, I don't think he said take a back seat. He says basically just allow for the rest of the discussion from the various council members. However, there is also no prohibition of the mayor being involved and engaged in those discussions at all.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that last part. What did you say?
There's no prohibition on the mayor being actively involved in those discussions. It's really just a situation where in most cases, the mayor likes to facilitate the meeting amongst the other 4 council members. However, I think in the situation with the committee nominations, my understanding was that the mayor was just trying to move the items along, kind of go through those discussions. Since there were several of them, it made total sense the way she handled that.
Okay, so I was hoping that we were going to go with Mr. Rosenberg, but since we're not going to do that, that gives me a understanding of how we're going to do the meetings from now on. So I appreciate that. The second question is about the abstention/quorum. They were talking about abstentions. So I was a little confused because formally we had taken abstentions as part of the quorum, but what we were doing is abstention meant yes. And there was at one point, it's on the record, where we said an abstention meant it didn't mean yes. So I just needed you to clarify, because it looks like there's a lot of scenarios where an abstention can mean a yes, or it's just for the basis of the quorum.
All right. We follow what is considered the default rule. Basically, it says that with respect to abstentions, they are counted for the purposes of determining whether you have a quorum. But the person who abstains vote is not counted either as a yes or a no. It's as if they were not there. So that is the default rule. In the past, that is a little different than the situation that if a council member is silent on a vote, in that case, their vote is considered as a yes affirmative vote with respect to the item that's before the council.
Wait, would you mind reframing that? Because I don't know how a silent vote is an abstention unless the person said silent.
If the city clerk asks for the vote and goes through the roll call vote, and one of the council members is absolutely silent, as opposed to saying they are abstaining, if they are silent, then that silence is taken as an affirmative vote going with the majority.
Is that by default?
That's basically just essentially the way the rules is worked.
Okay, and then the next question is the example of a 2 yes, 1 no, 1 abstention, and then 1 absent. They discuss that as a past version. Again, when we do the abstain votes, I'm thinking that they're counting yes. This is a different scenario from the one I presented above.
No, an abstention is never counted as a yes vote. An abstention is, in our scenario, just counted as if the person is not there. Again, the distinction between an abstention and a council member remaining silent is different. If a council member remains silent when the roll call vote is being taken, then that vote is counted as being part of the affirmative vote with a majority.
What do we do when someone doesn't vote and it's called out by the clerk as a different thing, like absent or couldn't hear? What are we going to do with that instead of immediately taking it as affirmative yes? Because we're doing all this through Zoom.
Well, that's why I think in the past we have given council members the opportunity, if they are silent, to try and get back in to the meeting. If in fact the council member, they are unable to connect, then they are counted as an absent vote at that point, if they're not part of the discussion on that item.
Okay, so then it's a discretionary way of looking about it. Because that's
think
what it's been in the
unfortunately-
past.
Unfortunately, it's not discretionary. Unfortunately, under the Zoom process, if there's a faulty connection, we do the best we can to try and reconnect with that council person. But if we can't do that, then that council person unfortunately is then deemed to be absent. That's why, to the extent council members can log in and use the system, the city system, it prevents those types of activities from occurring.
The city system. So you're saying that I can sign it through the city system so I'm not losing reception?
Essentially, we have not had the same problems when council members are at City Hall and basically logged in on the city system. We seem to have
Okay.
those problems.
And then through Zoom, I've noticed when I'm muted, my automatic votes get turned in the way that I haven't asked for them. And that's not by default, and it's not following the rules that you've just stated. So how are we handling that from now on?
Well, again, the hope is that we do not have connectivity problems. And we have in the past tried to, if there has been a connectivity problem, we have tried to sort of reconnect. However, at some point, we have to move on with the meeting. And if the person can't reconnect to the meeting at that point, they are deemed to be absent. And the vote is
Right, right. No, I understood that, but I said, I've been asked formally, the mayor has asked formally for the host to mute me, which means I have no power to vote. So there is no loss of connectivity there. So how are my votes being taken then?
the only times that I have heard the presiding officer ask you to be muted is when you have basically not adhered to the decorum of the meeting and follow the instructions with respect to getting back on subject matter. So
Yeah,
at that
that's,
point, you've been given numerous warnings, and to the extent at that point you're not abiding by the rules and the decisions of the presiding officer, then she has the ability to say, okay, I've given you a warning. At that point, it'd be appropriate to mute you.
that didn't answer my question. I said, once someone is muted, how is the vote taken?
Well, again, we try and make every effort to allow the council member to come back and count their vote. But if they are muted and absent and not basically abiding by the decisions of the presiding officer, then unfortunately they will be deemed absent.
So you're saying a muted person is deemed absent?
If the muting is by that person and not by the city, absolutely. We can't control.
No, if the muting is done by the mayor through the host.
There would be muting somebody as if they're not following basically the
Right,
required by the rules.
right. And so let me ask the question again. So the mayor asked the host to mute a council member. What is the default vote there?
Absent,
Okay, so the default vote becomes now absent.
correct.
Okay, the next question that I have, let me turn my page here. Let me see, keeping the police. Okay, so we haven't done a very nice job ever in the city of Victorville, as I'm concerned, in terms of keeping the public informed. We haven't been able to tell the body what we are doing, and a lot of people do end up saying, what just happened? What are we doing? So from now on, since we're talking about David Rosenberg being suggestive, will we continue now? Are we going to start incorporating a say in keeping the public apprised and the audience of what's going on? Will the chair be letting the public know what the body has done, telling them this is what we're doing, or we're not going to do that since it's suggestive?
That's certainly a question for the chair, but the experience I've had with the first couple of meetings with the chair, that has certainly been the case. I think she's done a very good job of informing the public of where we are, what we're doing, and what the decisions have been.
It's my understanding and my personal preference of looking at it that we have not done a job at all telling the people what we are doing when we vote. So that's why I brought that question, because we're not doing that job telling the people. My last question has to do with the question about muting and the ability to speak when there is no Zoom. So how will you start addressing, because COVID-19 will soon come to an end where we don't have to do meetings on Zoom. How do you expect to mute council members, since that won't be an ability or a power that the chair will have?
Well, again, I think the hope is that the rules of decorum will be abided by all council members, and there won't be a need to mute anybody. However, I do believe even if we are on the dais, there is the ability to mute somebody's microphones if necessary. Fortunately, again, the hope is that we will all continue to cooperate and abide by the things that Mr. Rosenberg has suggested. Like I said, I think this is a new beginning. We have a new presiding officer who's very familiar with these rules, and I think the meetings are going to be run a lot differently.
Okay, so with what you just said, the first question I had asked, you said that it was suggestive, so the chair doesn't have to abide, but you're ending the question that I just asked with saying that we're going to be abiding by what he has suggested. So are we picking and choosing what we're going to take from the video and what we're not going to take? Because that's what I have been hearing all along.
No, the plan is to basically have this video as your training background. We follow the rules that are established in the policy and procedures manual. And again, I think this is a new day. We have a new presiding officer that's familiar with those rules. So I'm looking forward to the meetings running a lot smoother and being very informative for both council members and the public.
Okay, so since that's the case, it looks like the chair would be taking a backseat to any debates if we're going to be following what he said and taking it as a guide. And if not, and it's her prerogative, I just want to know, because the laws or the provisions should be uniform and not pick and choose what's advantageous to one person versus a whole majority. I have no further questions, and I thank you for responding to my questions in such a manner. Take care.
Right,
Mr. Jabornowski, will you answer that last question or that last comment, please?
Yeah. Again, Mr. Rosenberg's suggestion as to the mayor taking a backseat, again, that's just a suggestion. It does not prevent the mayor from being actively involved and or participating in the debate on any, and to the extent she deems appropriate to take the lead on items. Again, it's a suggestion by Mr. Rosenberg. It's not a rule.
Got it. All of them are suggestions. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Member Irving, do you have any questions for the city attorney?
Yes, I do. My question is, I guess, more of a request for clarification. You mentioned that there is a past practice with the council as it relates to doing business that slightly deviates from Rosenberg with regard to adjournment and calling for a recess, specifically calling for a recess. What did you say? Would you please restate what you stated? It sounds like you said that the chair reserves the right to call for an adjournment and or a recess. Does that mean that other council members cannot?
No, that's not the case.
Okay.
We've sort of modified it so that we don't require a motion, that the mayor has the ability, but that does not prevent any council member from also making a motion to recess or adjourn.
Okay, excellent. Go ahead.
Rosenberg's only has the second scenario where basically it requires a motion. In addition to a council members being able to do it, we allow basically the presiding officer to do it on her own prerogative.
Very good. Thank you very much. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I have a few questions, and the first one, let me ask this. I just want to make sure that we're all clear. So just kind of yes or no. So to the extent that our policy and procedures manual says something different than Rosenberg's, that the policy manual trumps that, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and then in the video, Mr. Rosenberg talked about when an item can be reconsidered, and he talked about how it could be considered his kind of rule of thumb. And I think this was important because in that he was saying that there's some flexibility in what the chair can do, and it's within the chair's purview. But his rule of thumb is to never allow it to go beyond the next meeting if a member of the majority wants to suggest reconsideration of a past decision. Yet in our policy manual, and this is a case where it would trump, our policy manual only allows for reconsideration during the same meeting by a member of the majority, and then only to correct inadvertent errors or because there's now new information available that wasn't available at the time that the item was being considered. Is that correct?
That is correct. We are a little stricter with respect to our policy manual than the Rosenberg's analysis. Again, keep in mind, those rules though could be modified by a 4/5 vote of the entire council. We can always modify any of the rules.
And then on abstentions, I'm so thankful for Councilmember Gomez's questions on abstentions because they can be a little bit tricky. So if any of the members want to go back and look at that, they can just completely ignore that hypothetical number 3 because it will never apply to our meetings. But he treats all abstentions as equal, yet in our policy manual, there are 2 different types of abstentions. One that's made when there's no conflict of interest. In that case, the abstention counts as if a vote never occurred, but is good for purposes of a quorum. But if a member abstains because there is a true legal conflict, then that is counted as an absent vote and certainly can affect the quorum. Correct?
That is absolutely correct. And over the last couple of years, the FPPC has sort of enhanced that rule, and that they now completely require you to leave the dais. Council members should actually state the reason for the conflict, but once you leave the dais, you're obviously absent, so that you cannot count that person's attendance as part of the quorum for that item.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you some questions that I think are just really yes and no. So, and it comes from, thinking about how I facilitated meetings in the past, and I want to confirm with you that how I've done that comports with the training that you've provided us today. I think it does, but I do think it's important to confirm. And I also think that it'll help our council members know what they might expect from me as their presiding officer. So is it correct to expect that during meetings, all questions of parliamentary inquiry should be directed to the presiding officer?
Yes.
And so with that said, Mr. DeBortnowski, I want to extend to you an open invitation for you to weigh in anytime if you think that there's a particular nuance in parliamentary procedure or the complexity of the issue that you can weigh in and help the chair navigate that process.
I appreciate that opportunity. I would do the same with respect to Brown Act issues.
Yes, of course. Let's see. As to points of order and privilege, my practice has been that certainly a member can interrupt a speaker by saying point of order or point of privilege. But once that's said, the expectation is that that member should immediately pause and allow the chair to say, state your point. At that time, then the member, if it's a point of order, for example, the member would say, would succinctly cite the procedure allegedly being breached or state the point of privilege being asserted. And then at that point, the chair would make the ruling as to whether the point is well taken or not. Is that a correct articulation of how that might go?
Yes, absolutely. And then again, if the person disagrees with the ruling on the point of order, they could make a motion for an appeal.
Yes. And that's my next question. So certainly members can appeal from the decision of the chair, but appeals are only related to procedural rulings of the chair. And in that case, the question then would be put to the council by the chair, is the ruling of the chair sustained? Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's the only correct. And now, in my past practice has been always that the chair speaks first to kind of talk about why the ruling was made in such a way, and then the appellant can cite why there's disagreement with that, and then the council can chime in thereafter. Is that correct?
Yes, that'd be appropriate.
Okay. And one of the things that I've noticed has happened, and I can understand why it happens, is that points of clarification are being asserted in at least the last meeting or two that I've chaired. Points of clarification are not found in Rosenberg's Rules of Order. It's Robert's Rules, which, sometimes you have to separate in your mind which is which. But a point of clarification in Roberts is simply to resolve an issue of confusion, right? So certainly, I think it's appropriate if a member is confused as to where we are in the meeting or what's happening, they don't understand. I would think that it's important for the chair to be able to do that. So what I've done in the past, and tell me if this is acceptable, is to allow a member to ask to be recognized, to ask a question to resolve a particular confusion. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, and that's consistent with, I think, what Rosenberg is getting at, to use sort of common sense. That would be a common sense kind of response in terms of somebody wants some clarification, they should ask the presiding officer to seek that clarification. Absolutely makes sense.
Right, and then this would never be an opportunity to state an opinion or opine on a matter. It's simply to resolve a confusion.
Correct.
Okay. And I've always used the term suspend. So if I might say to a member that the member is out of order and will suspend, that's always my way of saying that the member will be silent so that the chair can offer the quick response as to why the member is out of order, so that that member has an opportunity to bring herself to order. Is that appropriate?
Absolutely.
Okay, and is it appropriate for individual members, council members, to give orders to the chair?
Absolutely not. No. It's, again, you are the presiding officer. If a council member has issues with the way you are doing things, they would then try and appeal some sort of decision of yours. But no, they should not be directing you on how to conduct a meeting.
Okay, and then quickly, could you spell out for us, this wasn't handled in Rosenberg's training, but I think it's important because Mr. Rosenberg talked about when it's time for council members to be able to ask questions of a staff report, he uses the phrase technical questions of clarification, which I've always done. And that assumes that council members have done their job in preparing for the meeting. And so that's the opportunity to just, kind of tease out a question or so when there's still some, there's not, particular clarity, or, might need a little bit more information. Is that your understanding that this is not okay, so let me say this. So with that in mind, can you explain to us the difference between a town hall meeting and a business meeting of the city council that's held in public, and why that questioning period might look different if you view those two things as one and the same?
Well, a town hall meeting is more of a sort of workshop type environment where typically you're not seeking decision making at the end. I mean, it's a discussion forum, so there's more latitude with respect to a question and answer session. In the formal meeting, and now policy manual basically has time limits, as you know, with respect to questions. The assumption is before you have a council meeting is that the council members make themselves familiar with the items on the agenda. And in fact, our policy manual also suggests that to the extent they have questions, they seek the responses to those questions from staff prior to the meeting. Rosenberg's and our policy manual anticipate that council members are fully informed and ready to go with respect to the agenda items. So in the formal meeting, council meeting, when the questions come up, they should be, again, for clarification as to issues in the staff report, something that a council member doesn't understand, but it should be limited to that subject matter. In the town hall kind of meeting, you have a lot more flexibility. Again, typically you're not seeking decisions that are there. It's more of a discussion meeting. So you have more flexibility. Hopefully that answers the question.
It does. And so if we view, if we keep in our minds that these are business meetings of the council held in public, and it's not, it's not the questions and comments that we make aren't meant to train and educate the public per se. It's to get our business done. Would that be a fair analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the reason the Brown Act requires that the agendas are posted 72 hours so the public themselves can familiarize themselves with the agenda items.
Well, and in fact, we post much more time in advance than the 72 hours. We post typically Thursday afternoon, which is a couple of extra days.
But again, yeah, the assumption is that the council members know what is going on, and that when they have the question session and the regular meeting, it's to clarify issues that they don't understand either in the staff report or the presentation made by staff.
Okay, very good. So those are all of my questions, and I'd like to open it up for, do council members have any additional questions? I want to make sure that we make best use of this opportunity. With that, Councilmember Gomez, do you have any follow-on questions?
Yes, I do. So first of all, I'd like to know, so I'm going to be speaking on public formats because I can see how I'm going to be shut down. So would you like me to give you through the chat that I'm going to speak on that item as a public? And or how would you like to address this? Because I know what you're trying to do, but you're not going to be able to stop what I'm going to do. But I don't want to be disruptive. I never have wanted to be disruptive, but I don't think you understand where I'm coming from. And so I don't want to make it like I'm against you or anybody, because I'm not. There's a way that I perform and the way that my identity was created in terms of how the electorate continues to elect me into this position. And so I don't want to argue with you and tell you to please cease and desist. I want to make it as smooth as possible, but I want to have my 3 minutes. And if there's a lack of clarification, I want to be able to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand where this is coming from, or I don't get what you're talking about. So in order of me seeming that I'm interrupting you or anybody else, I want to be able to have that freedom. So how do you think we can start doing that? Because I'm not going to stop what I'm doing, but I am going to stop making it seem like I'm interrupting you, because that's not my goal.
So presuming you're addressing that to me, Councilmember Gomez, first and foremost, let me share with you and the rest of the council that my goal is always that we can have the most efficient and productive meetings that we can, because we do want to make them the most informed and best decisions possible that we can with Victorville, for Victorville. So when meetings are being facilitated, I'm always going to be of the mind of conducting the meeting not only in accordance with procedures and policies, but in a fair and effective way. And so to that extent, Councilmember Gomez, I would encourage you to give this a chance. And certainly you on agenda items, it would be your prerogative to speak as a member of the public. But if you're asking questions, then they won't be responded to. So that would be the one disadvantage to doing that. And then also when you do that, then when you bring yourself back to the dais, you won't be able to comment again. So there's kind of that limit. Those are judgments that you can make, but I would certainly invite you to give it a go and see whether or not this is going to, this chair style is going to fit more with what you're comfortable with. But regardless, the chair is going to do what is necessary to conduct the meeting professionally and preserve order. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and then it's another question. So I think I've heard this a little before, but just to clarify what you meant. So you're saying that my first freedom of speech as a general public would thwart my 3 minutes when I ask to speak as a council member. Is that correct?
I'm gonna defer to our city attorney on that.
Well, certainly the assumption is that all of the council members make themselves familiar with the agenda items, and to the extent members of the public have questions, they also have access to that information. If you decide to speak as a member of the public, at that point, you limit your ability to come back and speak on the dais, because at that point you are influencing essentially other council members. So the issue is up to you as to whether or not you want to ask questions as part of the agenda item, or instead, if you want to basically ask questions as a member of the public.
Well, you didn't respond to my question. I don't, maybe I should reframe it. So I'm asking if I decide to do both as a council member, acting in the hat of a council member, which I have 3 minutes allotted through policy. And if I want to have a comment period, and I decide to do that as well, you're saying that if I decide to do the 3 minutes or whatever with the public, I'm now influencing the public just like everybody else is, and I cannot sit at the dais as a council member because my 3 minutes are being, I don't understand what policy, where are you citing this to be a fact? Because I don't understand. I'm just trying to understand where you're coming from.
Essentially, when you start speaking as a member of the public, you're not necessarily influencing the other members of the public. You are giving the appearance that you are essentially trying to influence the decision-making body, i.e. the council members. And therefore, it's inappropriate for council members to make discussions as members of the public and then come back and then try and have a continued debate as a member on the dais. And that's typically a rule followed by most jurisdictions, most public bodies. You can't
Okay.
basically sit there as a member of the public, try and influence the decision-making process
Okay.
and get back as.
So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to exercise my right to take the freedom as a council member to speak my 3 minutes, but also speak during the 3 minutes as a public member. And we're going to see how that fares by me not being able to speak during the 3 minutes, because as I said before, I'm not trying to interrupt people at all. But when I feel that I'm not being recognized because I'm either confused or perhaps I'm not using the correct point of privilege, point of order, I'm using Rosenberg's rather than policy manual or rather than parliamentary, and I feel shut down, I'm no longer as the minority council member being able to express my thoughts, then I'm going to revert to using the 3 minutes to speak so that I can say what I needed to say, but I'm still an acting council member. But if you can't cite how I am violating certain constitutional rights or certain policies that you believe that we have in play or statutes or provisions, and we play this out long enough to see what rights you are violating as a whole, I think that would bring a lot of hardship to our administration, because I'm going to test the ground and test the waters. But what I'm saying is, if I cannot speak freely and I feel like I'm being badgered, just like maybe you guys feel like I'm badgering and I'm not, I'm going to start exercising other rights that I believe that let me speak. And then I guess from there, we're going to have to see what violations came into play. I mean, I'm all about testing and I'm all about taking risks, if you haven't seen that. If that's my only option, I guess I can exercise it, but I don't want to feel like you're shutting me down. And so I'm trying right now to use this meeting to say, hopefully you're not going to try to shut me down. If I say I'm confused, and if I say point of order and it was wrong, I'm not going to be recognized, because I'm thinking, wait, I'm literally confused, but I don't know how you want me to utter this. And you're calling this an opinion, because at the dais, we don't have this opportunity to have dialogue. It's just motion done, gone, you're out. Motion done, gone, you're out. So I feel like, wait a minute, what did we just do? Wait a minute. Are we on item number 42, on 43? I get lost, and I just want to understand what's happening, and that's it.
Okay, so let me respond to that, Councilmember Gomez. I hear what you're saying completely, and certainly not the desire of the chair, and I certainly don't believe it's the desire of the rest of your colleagues for you to feel that way, and whether legitimate or not. But that's the beauty of this training session. It's recorded. And so each of us can go back and review to grow our understanding of what we've just been taught. And so I want everyone to know that as the chair, I'm going to do whatever I can to preserve order, have an efficient meeting, an effective meeting, and move it along. But I certainly, it would never be my desire for any council member to feel squelched or that their voice isn't being heard. But all of us have a certain accountability to the public to come prepared with a working understanding of parliamentary rule, the agenda before us, and all of those kind of things. But certainly, Councilmember Gomez or any member, if you are confused about a particular issue, just say, Madam Mayor, may I ask a question to resolve a confusion? And I can't imagine, unless that's being abused, I can't imagine that not being heard, again, unless it's being abused, because the whole point is that we're all working collegially as members of a team to do the best that we can for the city of Victorville. So I would just invite you to give this a go. I don't think it's our role to test the envelope and make meetings combative. I don't think that that's helpful, but I do think that we now have the tools that we need. We're all on the same page, and we can continue to learn by reviewing the video of this meeting. And I hope that that's going to drive things forward for our council meetings.
Madam Mayor, if I might.
Yes.
And maybe trying to speak a little bit more on point to what's contained in the policy manual. There is a specific provision that I have in front of me, and there may be more, but we have addressed this through the policy manual, where we've identified, and I'm looking at my page 13 of the policy manual. It falls under chapter 3. But it does speak to restrictions under public comment periods, and it does speak to a council member speaking in public if they recuse themselves from discussion in the item. So we at least in one place, and perhaps in another place of the policy manual, we do have rules on point speaking to that. So that document is certainly intended to provide guidance, I think, in this particular case.
Thank you. Okay, Member Gomez, did you have any other questions?
Sure she does.
Yeah, one other question, since Mr. Messer brought that up. I think what I want to say is our policies as individuals who create them, we have a much higher source of power that we can take stuff to the courts and see if what we're doing is indeed fair, or if we're in violation of someone trying to create freedom of their voice or trying to thwart. And that's why I said I don't want to, but if I have to test the waters and take risk, I'm more than willing to. There's a lot of things that we do at the local level that we don't take to the courts, and we continue to do effectively, thinking that they are the right thing to do when we have a population of people that are being elected that aren't not necessarily going to follow the majority of what we currently have. There's going to be changes in different parts of what we're doing, and our electorate continues to do that. And so all I'm saying is there's a mobilization, and it looks like a movement of change trying to occur. It's not happening quick enough, but like I said, I'm trying to understand how I can best represent the people, those people that elected me, that love the way how I express what I'm doing. And it could be a little bit jabbing to some, because I might not be as polished as other persons may think they would like me to be polished. But again, I'm not trying to be combative. I'm not trying to say, don't, use chapter 5 or whatever, chapter 3, section 13 on page 13, and you can dock Blanca this way, because remember, we have a court system that says, are we doing what we're doing correct or not? But I'm not trying to go that way. I'm not trying. I'm literally trying to tell you guys in this conversation that I want to do the things that I need to do so that the public that I represent feels that we're all doing our best, even though we're not the same. And so my question is, why can we not do that?
Mr. DeBortnowski.
Well, again, you get into the issue of the whole purpose here is to conduct the city's business and to conduct the meeting. And that's what your job is here. Your job is also to basically have and take the time and the effort to understand the issues beforehand. It's not to sit there during the public meeting to educate the public on all of these items. They have access as well, and they can also direct questions to the city staff to try and figure out what's going on. But your business is to conduct the business of the meeting with the assumption the council members are taking the time to understand the items and the issues before them. And certainly people have their free speech rights, but they have those in different forums as well. To the extent council members want to reach out and provide their opinions to members of the council, there's all kinds of social avenues they can do that on, such as the Facebook and other media devices as well. Nothing prevents a council member from doing it. But when you're in the meeting scenario, the idea is to get the business done. And so we need certain rules and regulations on how to accomplish that in the most efficient manner.
Okay.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gomez. All right, Member Becerra, do you have any follow-on questions?
I just have a question for Mr. Metzler. Mr. Metzler, you have invited myself, and I also remember Leslie, because we switched one time, to go over each council agenda, correct?
That's correct.
And you offer that to all of the council members?
I have offered that to all council members. That's correct.
Okay, so if there's any, I don't understand, I don't, isn't that the place to work things out with you and maybe the director that needs to answer the question?
Certainly with myself, yes.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to make sure that it just wasn't Leslie and I, because then I would have felt that, wow. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Irving, do you have any follow-up on questions?
I do not, thank you.
Thank you. And I just have 2 questions, I believe. Mr. Bornowski, is it your belief that the council's adopted policies and procedures manual are meet legal muster for our
Absolutely,
meetings?
absolutely.
Okay. And then, so here's another yes or no in past practice. So when a member of a board or commissioner, et cetera, demands the citing of procedures during a meeting, I've not been inclined to respond to that because I haven't felt that it's been productive, but certainly would make myself available in this case, would make you available to answer that member's questions in a different form outside the meeting. Would that be appropriate?
It'd be appropriate. It'd also give me a chance to make sure that, there's obviously different sources sometimes with respect to how to respond to questions, and it gives me a chance to make sure I give you the exact correct answer.
Okay, all right. Well, I think that we've had 2 rounds of questions. We've had a very full meeting. I trust and expect that it's been helpful for all of us in growing ourselves in our role as council members. Mr. Bornowski, thank you for a very informative and helpful presentation. And with no further business before us, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.